Hi, everyone. I'm Olivier Knox, Yahoo News chief Washington correspondent, and this is Yahoo News Live. And we are moments from President Obama announcing an about-face and halt the withdrawal of U.S. military personnel from Afghanistan. The president had hoped to have all American forces out by the time he leaves office in 2017, but now he's expected to prolong what has already been a 14-year involvement in that war-torn country. Right now, there are close to 10,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, a number that is expected to drop to 5,500 by the end of next year. But recent gains by the Taliban and the rise of ISIS in that country has made the situation for the U.S.-backed government in Kabul shaky at best. Here with me in the newsroom to discuss this is Dan Kleidman, deputy editor of Yahoo News. Danny, for years, Obama's bragged about ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, even though those conflicts have continued to claim Iraqi, Afghan, and in some cases American lives. Today, he's announcing a major shift in his Afghanistan strategy. He had been looking to leave just a very small force of about 1,000 troops by the time he left the White House to his successor. Today, if news reports are accurate, he's going to say that he's leaving America's longest war to his successor. Danny, what does that tell us about this president and war?
You know, I'm so struck. I mean, here we are again, right? I mean, how many times have we been in this position where the president has said he's going to make good on his promise to end these wars, to retrench, to get out of the miasma of the Middle East, to shift toward Asia and some of our other geopolitical priorities. And because of the things that happen on the ground, because war is essentially messy and unpredictable, he's had to adjust. It's very fluid, and the president clearly doesn't want to have to do this, but for a variety of reasons, which we'll hear about and we'll be able to get into, he's doing it again.
You know, we're just a week away from the leader of America's fight in Afghanistan, General Campbell, testifying before the Senate in public, saying that the president's initial hopes, his initial plan to leave this sort of small force was inadequate to the task.
Yeah, and that's another recurrent theme, right, with this president. It goes back to the earliest days of his presidency, practically, when that sort of, you know, massive, seemingly endless debate about what to do in Afghanistan, whether to surge or whether to pull the troops out, move to more of a counterterrorism strategy. He was boxed in by the generals because of leaks, because of public statements, and ultimately his hand was forced. We ended up with the surge in Afghanistan, and it looks like in a smaller sense, the same thing is happening again with public statements from the generals. In this case, I have no doubt that President Obama agreed with the assessment. You look at what's going on the ground in Afghanistan, and the Taliban has taken over, moved all over the country again. You have the possibility of ISIS being a presence there. And I can't help but think that this decision is at least in some ways shaped by his experience in Iraq.
Here comes the president now.
Good morning. Last December, more than 13 years after our nation was attacked by al-Qaeda on 9/11, America's combat mission in Afghanistan came to a responsible end. That milestone was achieved thanks to the courage and the skill of our military, our intelligence, and civilian personnel. They served there with extraordinary skill and valor, and it's worth remembering especially the more than 2,200 American patriots who made the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. I visited our troops in Afghanistan last year to thank them on behalf of a grateful nation. I told them they could take great pride in the progress that they helped achieve. They struck devastating blows against the al-Qaeda leadership in the tribal regions, delivered justice to Osama bin Laden, prevented terrorist attacks, and saved American lives. They pushed the Taliban back so the Afghan people could reclaim their communities, send their daughters to school, and improve their lives. Our troops trained Afghan forces so they could take the lead for their own security and protect Afghans as they voted in historic elections, leading to the first democratic transfer of power in their country's history. Today, American forces no longer patrol Afghan villages or valleys. Our troops are not engaged in major ground combat against the Taliban. Those missions now belong to Afghans, who are fully responsible for securing their country. But, as I've said before, While America's combat mission in Afghanistan may be over, our commitment to Afghanistan and its people endures. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not allow Afghanistan to be used as safe haven for terrorists to attack our nation again. Our forces therefore remain engaged in two narrow but critical missions: training Afghan forces and supporting counterterrorism operations against the remnants of al-Qaeda. Of course, compared to the 100,000 troops we once had in Afghanistan, today fewer than 10,000 remain in support of these very focused missions. I meet regularly with my national security team, including commanders in Afghanistan, to continually assess, honestly, the situation on the ground, to determine where our strategy is working and where we may need greater flexibility. I've insisted consistently that our strategy focus on the development of a sustainable Afghan capacity and self-sufficiency. And when we've needed additional forces to advance that goal, or we've needed to make adjustments in terms of our timetables, then we've made those adjustments. Today, I want to update the American people on our efforts. Since taking the lead for security earlier this year, Afghan forces have continued to step up. This has been the first fighting season where Afghans have largely been on their own, and they are fighting for their country bravely and tenaciously. Afghan forces continue to hold most urban areas, and when the Taliban has made gains, as in Kunduz, Afghan forces, backed by coalition support, have been able to push them back. This has come at a very heavy price. This year alone, thousands of Afghan troops and police have lost their lives, as have many Afghan civilians. At the same time, Afghan forces are still not as strong as they need to be. They are developing critical capabilities: intelligence, logistics, aviation, command and control. And meanwhile, the Taliban has made gains, particularly in rural areas, and can still launch deadly attacks in cities, including Kabul. Much of this was predictable. We understood that as we transitioned, that the Taliban would try to exploit some of our movements out of particular areas, and that it would take time for Afghan security forces to strengthen. Pressure from Pakistan has resulted in more al-Qaeda coming into Afghanistan, and we've seen the emergence of an ISIL presence. The bottom line is, in key areas of the country, the security situation is still very fragile, and in some places, there's risk of deterioration. Fortunately, in President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah, there is a national unity government that supports a strong partnership with the United States. During their visit earlier this year, President Ghani and I agreed to continue our counterterrorism cooperation, and he has asked for continued support as Afghan forces grow stronger. Following consultations with my entire national security team, as well as our international partners and members of Congress, President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah, I'm therefore announcing the following steps, which I am convinced offer the best possibility for lasting progress in Afghanistan. First, I've decided to maintain our current posture of 9,800 troops in Afghanistan through most of next year, 2016. Their mission will not change. Our troops will continue to pursue those two narrow tasks that I outlined earlier: training Afghan forces and going after al-Qaeda. But maintaining our current posture through most of next year, rather than a more rapid drawdown, will allow us to sustain our efforts to train and assist Afghan forces as they grow stronger, not only during this fighting season, but into the next one. Second, I've decided that instead of going down to a normal embassy presence in Kabul by the end of 2016, we will maintain 5,500 troops at a small number of bases, including at Bagram, Jalalabad in the east, and Kandahar in the south. Again, the mission will not change. Our troops will focus on training Afghans and counterterrorism operations, but these bases will give us the presence and the reach our forces require to achieve their mission. In this sense, Afghanistan is a key piece of the network of counterterrorism partnerships that we need from South Asia to Africa to deal more broadly with terrorist threats quickly and prevent attacks against our homeland. Third, we will work with allies and partners to align the steps I'm announcing today with their own presence in Afghanistan after 2016. In Afghanistan, we are part of a 42-nation coalition, and our NATO allies and partners can continue to play an indispensable role in helping Afghanistan strengthen its security forces, including respect for human rights. And finally, because governance and development remain the foundation for stability and progress in Afghanistan, we will continue to support President Ghani and the National Unity Government as they pursue critical reforms. New provincial governors have been appointed, and President Ghani is working to combat corruption, strengthen institutions, and uphold rule of law. As I told President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah yesterday, efforts that deliver progress and justice for the Afghan people will continue to have the strong support of the United States. And we cannot separate the importance of governance with the issues of security. The more effective these reforms happen, the better off the security situation is going to be. We also discussed American support of an Afghan-led reconciliation process. By now, it should be clear to the Taliban and all who oppose Afghanistan's progress, the only real way to achieve the full drawdown of U.S. and foreign troops from Afghanistan is through a lasting political settlement with the Afghan government. Likewise, sanctuaries for the Taliban and other terrorists must end. Next week, I'll host Prime Minister Sharif of Pakistan, and I will continue to urge all parties in the region to press the Taliban to return to peace talks and to do their part in pursuit of the peace that Afghans deserve. In closing, I want to speak directly to those whose lives are most directly affected by the decisions I'm announcing today, to the Afghan people who have suffered so much. Americans' commitment to you and to a secure, stable, and unified Afghanistan, that remains firm. Our two nations have forged a strategic partnership for the long term, and as you defend and build your country, today is a reminder that the United States keeps our commitments. And to our men and women in uniform, I know this means that some of you will rotate back into Afghanistan. With the end of our combat mission, this is not like 2010, when nearly 500 Americans were killed and many more were injured. But still, Afghanistan remains dangerous. 25 brave Americans have given their lives there this year. I do not send you into harm's way lightly. It's the most solemn decision that I make. I know the wages of war and the wounded warriors I visit in the hospital and in the grief of Gold Star families. But as your commander-in-chief, I believe this mission is vital to our national security interests in preventing terrorist attacks against our citizens and our nation. And to the American people, I know that many of you have grown weary of this conflict. As you are well aware, I do not support the idea of endless war, and I have repeatedly argued against marching into open-ended military conflicts that do not serve our core security interests. Yet, given what's at stake in Afghanistan and the opportunity for a stable and committed ally that can partner with us in preventing the emergence of future threats, and the fact that we have an international coalition, I am firmly convinced that we should make this extra effort. In the Afghan government, we have a serious partner who wants our help, and the majority of the Afghan people share our goals. We have a bilateral security agreement to guide our cooperation. And every single day, Afghan forces are out there fighting and dying to protect their country. They're not looking for us to do it for them. I'm speaking of the Afghan Army cadet who grew up seeing bombings and attacks on innocent civilians, who said, because of this, I took the decision to join the Army to try and save innocent people's lives. Or the police officer training to defuse explosives. I know it's dangerous work, he says, but I've always had a dream of wearing the uniform of Afghanistan, serving my people and defending my country. Or the Afghan commando, a hardened veteran of many missions, who said, if I start telling you the stories of my life, I might start crying. He serves, he said, because the faster we bring peace, the faster we can bring education, and the stronger our unity will grow. Only if these things happen will Afghanistan be able to stand up for itself. My fellow Americans, after so many years of war, Afghanistan will not be a perfect place. It's a poor country that will have to work hard on its development. There will continue to be contested areas. But Afghans like these are standing up for their country. If they were to fail, it would endanger the security of us all. And we've made an enormous investment in a stable Afghanistan. Afghans are making difficult but genuine progress. This modest but meaningful extension of our presence, while sticking to our current narrow missions, can make a real difference. It's the right thing to do. May God bless our troops and all who keep us safe, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
Mr. President, can you tell us how disappointing this decision is for you? Can you tell us how disappointing this decision is for you?
This decision is not disappointing. Continually, my goal has been to make sure that we give every opportunity for Afghanistan to succeed while we're still making sure that we're meeting our core missions. And as I've continually said, my approach is to assess the situation on the ground, figure out what's working, figure out what's not working, make adjustments where necessary. This isn't the first time those adjustments have been made. This won't probably be the last. What I'm encouraged by is the fact that we have a government that is serious about trying to deliver security and the prospects of a better life for the Afghan people. We have a clear majority of the Afghans who want to partner with us and the international community to achieve those goals. We have a bilateral security arrangement that ensures that our troops can operate in ways that protect them while still achieving their mission. And we've always known that we had to maintain a counterterrorism operation in that region in order to tamp down any reemergence of active al-Qaeda networks or other networks that might do us harm. So this is consistent with the overall vision that we've had. And frankly, we anticipated, as we were drawing down troops, that there would be times where we might need to slow things down or fill gaps in Afghan capacity. And this is a reflection of that. And it's a dangerous area. So part of what we're constantly trying to balance is making sure that Afghans are out there, they're doing what they need to do, but that we are giving them a chance to succeed, and that we're making sure that our force posture in the area for conducting those narrow missions that we need to conduct, we can do so relatively safely. There's still risks involved, but force protection, the ability of our embassies to operate effectively, those things all factor in. And so we've got to constantly review these approaches. The important thing I want to emphasize, though, is that the nature of the mission has not changed, and the cessation of our combat role has not changed. Now, the 25 military and civilians who were killed last year, that always weighs on my mind, and 25 deaths or 25 too many, particularly for the families of the fallen. But understand, relative to what was involved when we were in an active combat role and actively engaged in war in Afghanistan, was a very different scenario. Here you have a situation where we have clarity about what our mission is. We've got a partner who wants to work with us. We're going to continually make adjustments to ensure that we give the best possibilities for success. And I suspect that we will continue to evaluate this going forward, as will the next president. And as conditions improve, we'll be in a position to make further adjustments. But I'm absolutely confident this is the right thing to do, and I'm not disappointed, because my view has always been, how do we achieve our goals while minimizing the strain and exposure on our men and women in uniform, and make sure that we are constantly encouraging and sending a message to the Afghan people. This is their country and they've got to defend it. But we're going to be a steady partner for them. Okay? Thank you, everybody.
We just heard from President Barack Obama speaking from the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing of the White House. He announced a fairly dramatic revision to his plan to draw down American forces in Afghanistan. He said he will be drawing down to about 9,800 throughout 2016 instead of leaving just 1,000 troops there. And he left the door open to drawing down to 5,500 thereafter. Danny, there's quite a bit to unpack there, starting for me with a really sobering assessment of the security situation in Afghanistan 14 years after American troops went there.
You know, what's interesting to me is the president here was trying to thread a needle. On the one hand, we're going to be keeping 9,800 American troops in Afghanistan, but at the same time, he's trying to say the mission has been successful. And yes, we may have to make adjustments here and there, but fundamentally it is working. And the mission is not changing. It's going to continue to be counterterrorism and assisting Afghan troops. Well, the reality is there is a raging insurgency that's still taking place in Afghanistan all these years later. The original Obama mission was counterinsurgency, and we did the surge, and then we were going to draw down and get out, and here we are. So it's a bit of a tough sell, but one thing that was interesting to me was there had been some sense that perhaps he was going to leave this final decision to his successor. He did say fairly clearly that this would last until the end of 2016 while he's still commander-in-chief. Now, we've seen changes all along, so that does not in any way ensure that this will not be left up to the next president, whoever that ends up being. But at least he sent that message that this is something that he plans to do only on his watch.
I do want to see how exactly that works. You know, keeping 9,800 American troops there instead of drawing down to 1,000. And then he said at the end of 2016, drawing down to 5,500. I kind of want to see the logistics of that. How much of that will be left to his successor? You have to assume a fair chunk of it will. And then there's the question of getting from 5,500 down to whatever we end up with. But the top of those remarks sounded like an indictment of the American war effort. 14 years after we go in, Al-Qaeda is back. 14 years after we go in, the Taliban are waging, as you pointed out, a raging insurgency. 14 years after we go in, we've seen a rise of the Islamic State. It was almost, I felt like I was listening to an anti-war speech, which, of course, coming from this president, wouldn't be that surprising. The other really, really interesting component of these remarks was how many times he took pains to praise the strong partner the United States has in President Ghani of Afghanistan.
It's a really important point. And before the president started to speak, I was beginning to talk about how his experience in Iraq, the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq in 2011 after there was a status of forces agreement, has to have shaped in some ways his thinking about Afghanistan. Because as we all know, troops came out. We didn't have a status of forces agreement with Maliki, the Iraqi president, who was not a particularly good ally. And then we get the rise of ISIS. So on the one hand, I think the president is mindful of the danger of those kinds of vacuums when you have a lack of stability. But the key difference here is what you just referred to, is that in President Ghani, we clearly have a good ally, and in fact, an ally who has been asking the United States to keep this current troop posture in Afghanistan. With Hamid Karzai, the former Afghan president, we had someone who was widely considered to be within the White House, within the national security establishment here, someone who was not just not a great ally, but duplicitous and often working against U.S. interests and often saying we want all the troops, American troops, out. So that is a really important distinction, and I think that's what gives the president some of his confidence that this is the right thing to do.
You talked about the withdrawal from Iraq. When you talk to Obama aides, they tell you leaving American troops in Iraq with no legal protection except Prime Minister Maliki's say-so, at the risk of having him pull American troops before the Iraqi courts for wrongdoing. Obama aides say that would have been crazy. But as you know, Republicans have pounded the president for that withdrawal, saying that it set the stage for Maliki to purge the Iraqi military of competent officers and led directly to the Iraqi military's collapse in the face of the Islamic State. Jeb Bush apparently is out with a statement in response, basically saying that he welcomes Obama's decision not to abandon Afghanistan. What do you think we're going to hear from both sides of the 2016 field?
You know, I think for the most part, the Republicans will get that kind of tepid, backhanded praise from them for this policy. I think the Democrats, by and large, will rally around the president for this decision. I think that clearly, I think in a sense that sort of anti-war element of the Democratic base is still out there. It's still important, but these are not issues that are dominating this campaign. And I think even from those candidates who are more firmly on the left, this is not going to be Bernie Sanders, for example. This is not going to be an issue that's going to animate voters in the way that it has in the past.
I have to imagine that they're all poring over the details of this plan and wondering exactly what does the picture for American forces look like at the end of 2016.
Well, that's right. And for those who think they actually have a real chance of being president, and most of them generally do, whether they do or not have a chance, right. I think they probably are thinking, gee, this could be my decision at some point. What's going to happen next? How will I execute that drawdown?
And how will what will this president do between now and then? Because one of the things that the president repeatedly said was he left it open to future adjustments.
Absolutely. And that means that all the way through this campaign and up until the election day and beyond, this president has the potential of, whether he wants to or not, injecting himself into campaign politics.
So there's another thing that I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this, is the president describing how the mission continues, how it's supporting the Afghans and training them, and we're not doing combat missions. Well, as you know, an American airplane recently just wiped out an international hospital in Kunduz. That sounds like a combat mission to me, to be totally honest.
Absolutely, and we're still going to be flying missions in support of Afghan troops. Wars are unpredictable. It is easy for there to be mishaps and accidents and for people to get stuck. And remember, we're talking about terrorist organizations. We're talking about the presence of ISIS, and these are not traditional conventional wars. The front line is everywhere you are, and so unless you're hunkered down inside barracks or in an embassy, you are exposed to the dangers of war, and that is a real risk. And the president understands that, but clearly he wanted to. And he kept saying over and over again that this is not a combat mission. That combat mission has ended, but those dangers still exist.
There's another interesting aspect about the Obama presidency and the use of force, is that for all the talk from Republicans that he's sort of a squishy guy who really just wants to use diplomacy, doesn't really want to use force, he's actually used force quite a lot.
Absolutely. In a way, I think in his mind, he has used force in ways to try to keep us from continuing these kind of traditional kinds of wars, these set-piece battles where you need hundreds of thousands of troops, more pinpoint the use of drones, the use of special forces.
Danny, I've got to cut you off. We apparently have Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the 2016 contenders, on the phone. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So what did you hear from the president? Did you like what he said? What are your concerns?
Well, to be honest with you, I just got bits and pieces because I've been in a meeting here. I don't like the idea of going down to 5,500 based on a date on the calendar. I like the idea of continuing to 9,800 through most of 2016. It should be a conditions-based withdrawal. Our soldiers over there are an insurance policy against the next 9/11. So going down to 5,500 makes absolutely no sense to me.
Can I ask Senator Graham, it's Dan Clydeman, is 9,800 enough, or given what you're seeing on the ground, but is it enough? I mean, to get the job done?
Our commanders say they wanted 13,600. We went to 9,800. They tell me that gives a presence in all four corners of Afghanistan. You're able to get outside of Kabul and interact with the Afghan military, and it gives you some counterterrorism footprint. The key here is to make sure the Afghan army doesn't fall apart, and the counterterrorism mission, which protects the homeland, is robustly resourced. I wouldn't go one soldier below 9,800. If I were president, I'd probably be at 13.6. But I could live with 9,800. 5,500 is a disaster.
Senator, at the top of his remarks, the president talked about the resurgent Taliban, a rise in an al-Qaeda presence, the Islamic State putting down roots in Afghanistan. What does it say that 14 years after American troops first went into Afghanistan, we still have all of these stubborn security problems?
Well, you're going to have them. Radical Islam is metastasizing and sort of running wild. I mean, what happens in Iraq and Syria? Hey, guys, what happens in Iraq and Syria is spreading throughout the world. But Afghanistan is a completely different country in 2015 compared to 2001. Millions of girls are going to school. Kabul has light. It has power. There's an economy. The life expectancy has increased by 15 or 20 years. So don't tell me or anybody else that things haven't gotten better in Afghanistan. They've got a couple 100,000 people trained under arms, but we're not there yet. Radical Islam is growing in strength in other places. That affects Afghanistan.
Senator, the Bush administration didn't trust Nouri al-Maliki in Iraq. They didn't like Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan. Do you trust President Ghani in Afghanistan to be a strong partner, as the president said?
The biggest trade since Babe Ruth is Ghani for Karzai. This is good. This is good. I know Ghani very well. Karzai became a paranoid, volatile leader that turned on us, and Ghani gets it. He's a very smart man. He understands the value of an American presence. He is trying to reform the country from top to bottom, including the military. We've got a long way to go in Afghanistan, but we've come a long way. The best partner we've had since the beginning of the war, and that's why we want to properly resource Afghanistan to take advantage of his new leadership.
One of the other things the president said was he's going to be hosting the president of Pakistan next week. How concerned are you about Pakistan's role in helping the United States tamp down al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and now the Islamic State?
It's very important. One of the reasons you don't want to let Afghanistan deteriorate and the Taliban come back is it puts pressure on Pakistan. They have 100 nuclear weapons. So you got 100 reasons to make sure that you can do what you can in Afghanistan. But Pakistan double deals. You got the ISI that helps the Taliban on one day. The next day they'll share intelligence about ISIL or Al-Qaeda. They don't know what we're doing. I believe that once Pakistan saw that America was not going to withdraw from Afghanistan until we got things in a good, sustainable spot, they would adjust their behavior. They're making double bets. They're helping us on one day, and they're also betting the Taliban may come back the next because they're not so sure about who we are and what we're going to do. But it's good to talk to Pakistan, and Sharif, it is very good for the president to push the Prime Minister of Pakistan to up his game.
Senator, one last one before we let you go. You're in the middle of the 2016 race. On the other side, the front runner is former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I know you want the White House for yourself, but would you feel confident about the way she would handle the war in Afghanistan?
I think on the war in Afghanistan, she would be open to a conditions-based withdrawal. I think that Secretary Clinton would leave the number of troops that the commanders recommended and wouldn't have to, fulfill a campaign promise. But in general, she said she wouldn't. She took off the table ground forces in Syria. I don't know how you destroy ISIL in Syria without a ground component coming from the region of which we'll have to be part of. Russia and Iran are a real problem for her. But I would say in Afghanistan, she would probably be far more open than President Obama to leading the residual force of 9,800.
All right, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, one of the 2016 presidential nomination contenders. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you.
All right, Danny, what do you think of Senator Graham's take on Afghanistan?
Well, I think it was interesting in this respect. I think he's an iconoclastic politician, and he is willing to essentially praise President Obama's strategy and, by extension, the job that he thinks that Hillary Clinton would do. And I think that kind of stands out in this kind of smash mouth political race. Where he is firm and is not changing his position is the strategy that they have had, or in his view, have not really had at all in Syria and Iraq and dealing with the rise of ISIS. So in a way, I think that was kind of refreshing and also kind of emblematic of what he's been saying out there.
All right, Danny Kleinman, thanks a lot.
You.
We always look forward to hearing what you have to say, so use hashtag Yahoo Live and let us know what you think about the United States' continued involvement in Afghanistan. I'm Olivier Knox. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.